It's not going to be something that necessarily magically changes things overnight. But if you do it consistently, it will impact your happiness, your developer's happiness, and then ultimately your team's performance to do one-on-ones.
Welcome to DevTalk with Dan. I'm joined by Peter Inge, co founder of DevClarity. We'll be discussing the power of one on ones in software development teams and how to make them more effective. I'm excited to welcome Peter Inge, co founder of DevClarity. Peter brings a unique blend of finance and software expertise, having worked in equity investing, corporate finance, and fintech software development. At DevClarity, Peter's on a mission to make engineering management easier. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Dan. Excited to be here.
So let's just jump right into the foundation of effective one-on-ones. What makes one-on-ones crucial for software developers and managers?
Well, really, one-on-ones are the cornerstone of effective management, in our opinion. And this is where real management actually happens. Like when someone says they're a manager or you manage people, what does that mean? It's not just following tasks or measuring deadlines. It's in the individual conversations you have with your people where you actually act as a manager. And so this is a critical part. This is where you build relationships, where you develop trust, where you get an understanding of the challenges your developers face. Without regular one-on-ones with your team, you're fighting a losing battle. And so, our belief is that step one in becoming an effective engineering manager is establishing a routine one-on-one process. Now, much of this is true for all managers across functional areas. However, it's even more critical for engineering managers because of some of the unique challenges you face. Not only do they have all the normal managerial tasks, which are hard, like gauging sentiment across your team and tracking performance and getting feedback, but they also have to grapple with unique communication preferences and remote async teams, complex technical projects, which are hard to communicate inside the team and outside, and employees that can have a much bigger impact on the organization than anyone else. And so constant communication is critical.
Yeah, I've seen that. And coming on as a new manager recently, one of the very first things I did was make sure to use that one-on-one time to just connect with them as people to
Right.
better understand, the challenges that they're facing and hopefully get them to open up about what their career goals are. Because I can't
Right.
help make those happen if you don't trust me enough to talk to me about them.
Right.
So
Yeah.
having that
And
in
it's a,
mind, how do we set clear goals and expectations just for the one-on-ones themselves?
yeah, I think, and maybe thinking of it through the lens of a new manager is a helpful construct. And maybe you can say what you think about this since you've gone through it recently. I think when you're getting to know new people, it is useful to be very explicit on the front end about like your views on one-on-ones. Like this is something that I care about. This is something I think is valuable and important, and here's why it's also valuable and important for you. I mean, obviously that's a critical point. Um, Effective managers universally that we talk to always value developing their people basically more than anything else. Sometimes to a fault, beyond company objectives. They really care about their people, but there are mixed feelings from some employees and developers who have had maybe bad bosses in the past around one-on-ones. Like, is this a waste of my time? If done right, it's the highest leverage thing that you can do. So being clear on the front end about the importance of it and why it's valuable is important, and then also setting some expectations around like what it will actually look like specifically. Like I'm someone who does weekly one-on-ones for 30 minutes or whatever it may be, and say, this doesn't have to be some deep exploration of your psyche or anything like that. We can just catch up, but the key is really just consistency. Some one-on-ones you'll talk about baseball or what you did this weekend. Some one-on-ones, deeper stuff will come up. But it's really just about that consistency and building that relationship.
Right. And I think it's important as a manager to show people that you're setting aside time just for them to hear them
Right.
and to communicate, additional necessary things. But it's a reserved period of time for a direct conversation between a manager and a teammate. I,
Right.
I, I think having just, we're working on budgets for next year, right? My biggest line item is the people. So
Of
the
course.
biggest cost savings that I can have for the company is to use them effectively, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's one of the reasons that I just think that relationship is so important.
Yeah, if you're preaching to the choir on that one. My last role, I was CFO of a
Right.
software company, and we when I joined, we had 20 people. By the end, we had 160 people, and by far the biggest line item in the entire company was the software developers. And I think it is important to think about them in the way you just mentioned, which is these are your most valuable assets or investments if you're a software company. And so people, leaders and executives can be stingy around expenses when it comes to like adding another SaaS tool or whatever, but we don't think about the things that really move the needle the most, which is how do I manage my developers most effectively? And really, that's what we're trying to solve with Dev Clarity.
Awesome. It's a important problem. And especially as we see companies, in good times they balloon their engineering department, in bad times they lay them all off. That ebb and flow of of opportunity, but the fundamental thing is that they're people.
Right,
And if we are more aware and capable of managing those resources, then we don't have those ebb and flow issues because we're effectively using the resources that we have.
right.
What do you think are the most common pitfalls to avoid in one-on-one conversations?
Yeah, the first one is very clear to me, which is just making them status updates. It's so easy to fall into that, but that's just really not a high leverage use of your time, especially in a world where we have a lot of tools to handle stuff like that asynchronously, and especially for software developers, where everything you're doing is basically tracked on a computer and can be seen in some form or fashion. If you think about it, like and you have an engineering manager and a software developer on the call at the same time. That's an expensive meeting. And you want to make sure that you're actually getting your value out of it. And simply saying what you've been working on is a waste of time. And it importantly doesn't actually help the individual themselves, which again is the goal. So making them status updates instead of meaningful discussions is probably the number one pitfall, I'd say. Number two would be dominating the conversation instead of listening to them actively. So, as a manager, you're probably going to have some things you want to talk about, and that's okay. But I think you should lead with listening and really and be aware of your own personality. Like if you're someone who wants to talk a lot, like really try to make yourself listen. And a kind of a corollary to that is don't feel a need to rush to fill the silence. Especially with developers, that can be like a hard thing to do, but you got to give people space to process sometime and just kind of open up and maybe don't have too harsh of expectations. Um, Last thing is basically not following up on something that your developers mentioned to you. If you're going to go through the time of trying to establish a one-on-one process, get buy-in from your people, schedule time on both of your busy schedules to sit down and have a conversation, work on the relationship enough to get them to open up to you, and they do that and then you don't follow up on what they said, it's the most self-defeating action you could have. And
Exactly.
so failing to document action items or follow through on commitments uh, is one of the biggest mistakes you can make in one-on-ones.
Wow. Yeah. Undermine yourself. Exactly. Undo all the trust that you just built.
Right. It happens all the time because understandably, um, managers are busy. Um, plug for DevClarity a little bit, but they don't have good tooling to help them manage these things. Um, and they don't want to be dropping these balls, but I mean, there's a lot going on.
Right. Speaking of dev clarity, how does the AI component enhance one-on-one conversations?
Yeah, I would say that I can get into the AI component. I'd say the software overall is really what adds the benefit to the one-on-one process. Like simply put, we're just giving you a structure for good management.
Right.
Being a good manager is fairly straightforward. but we consistently fail. Why? Because again, there's a lot going on. You don't have the accountability constructs. Maybe you were never really taught what it means to be a good manager. And so using our software, we're just trying to make it easy to be a good manager. In the case of one-on-ones, we give managers instant access to previous meeting notes, personalized guidance for each developer so that incorporates AI, and really just bringing all the stuff that you need in one place to where it's very kind of easy and frictionless.
Yeah, like any other meeting, you should prep for your one-on-one.
Right.
And I think your tool gives us an opportunity to make that process more efficient by
Right.
keeping everything in one place and then providing some summarization and things that jog your memory of your previous conversation and those action items that you said you were going to
Right.
do.
Right. And you know, we're only scratching the surface. Just this week we integrated with Jira, and so now you haven't even seen this um in the one-on-one note-taking screen. You can see um AI generated summarizations of what people have been working on, and so you can have that context when you go into the conversation. We provide AI suggested action items if you get stuck and you don't know what next steps are. So there's a lot of places that you can use AI to just help you process all of the information that you're taking in as a manager in a more effective way. But I do think the core of it has actually very little to do with AI. It's just helping people have a structure for effective management.
I find that after a year of one-on-one, so we're talking, 52 meetings, you get
Yeah.
to that annual review
Mm,
and the dread of for every individual going back through 52 meeting there's the one where we
right.
talked about their camping vacation. But
Right.
where's the ones where we talked about the meaty stuff? How do I find those and then
Right.
compile that into sort of like, just think of a start stop continue kind of format for
Right.
improvements for the coming year? Like, that's a daunting task if you have, say, 10 reports, right?
Yes. Oh,
How can you
yeah.
go through 520 notes that may
Right.
or may not be relevant and try and sift through this? And I think that's an opportunity where the current AI technology that we have really can
Hmm.
come into play.
Yeah, and to your point about the 520 notes, like what ends up actually happening in in that scenario is either you do try to do that because you really care, but there's just like no way you're going to do it at a super high quality level.
Right.
That's just way too much. Like, and honestly, AI is a better fit for that than the human brain anyway. Or you basically don't do it, which you know is a disservice to your developers and leads to problems down the line with churn and stuff like that, employee churn and stuff like that.
And your recency bias completely comes into play.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah.
conversation becomes, how did this developer piss me off the latest?
Right.
Right.
Right. And you know, it's complex, right? Because incentive alignment matters here, but you don't want that, right? Like you can do that for a year and life will go on, hopefully. But I mean, you know, it sows the seeds of things that you don't want to deal with in the future, whether it's performance issues across your team or dissatisfaction.
We talked about some of the best practices, like um, providing guidance and feedback, but practicing the active listening part,
Hmm.
and making space for people to think about their responses. But how do we deal with situations where we have to address sensitive or difficult topics?
Yeah, that's always a tough question. Um, And you know, we recently wrote a piece about how to ask good questions in one-on-ones, but perhaps we should do one just more specifically on giving feedback. Um, it all starts with a trusting relationship. And so, like again, a lot of things you'll hear me say, if you ask 10 different questions, we'll come back to the same first principles answers, which is why I say this is fairly straightforward. It's just not easy to execute all the time. But so the underpinning of being able to talk about address sensitive or difficult topics is that you have some level of trust with the person. Otherwise, it just won't happen. Period, and they won't tell you, and it'll affect their performance in some way. But let's say you have developed a relationship to that point. Of course, the first thing is just kind of to approach with some level of empathy, which can be hard, particularly for us kind of more technical, analytical types. Something I have to work on too. But approach with empathy and try to avoid blame, like really looking through a lens of understanding and unblocking. and moving forward rather than focusing on mistakes of the past, perhaps. Um, Focusing on behaviors rather than the personality
Right.
is a useful tool, and so it's a little less personal. It's a little less ego threatening, and it's more about like this is a productive or destructive behavior, and here's how we might want to work through that. And then always being as specific as possible to avoid misunderstandings, because sometimes when you get into tough topics, um, people can really just be miscommunicating. Like there may not actually be a core problem. They might just be talking past each other. So trying to use specific examples or get really clear with what exactly the problem is helpful.
Yeah, I agree. The addressing the behavior and not the person. It's not you, it's this manifestation and then the impact of that, and it's
Hmm.
affecting the quality of your work, the attitudes of the people around you, the whatever its impact is, really helps to, I think, shed light on the necessity that we need, a change in
Hmm.
behavior or activity of some sort, and
Yeah.
then to make the person a uh, participant in creating the solution, I think is valuable as well.
Yeah. That's a good point.
To mandate a solution is often
Right.
slippery, slippery
Yeah.
slope,
Yeah.
right?
It doesn't tend to work. I mean, it depends on the context, right? Like if it's a very specific, like technical task, like sure, there could be like a clear solution. But in the people domain, solutions are usually not so clear cut. And if it's a personal thing that people are working on, in my experience, in work or in personal life, you really can't force people to do something they're not bought into. And so
Right,
there does have to be that sense of like, I want to grow in this area. But that's where a good leader can help them understand why it's worth considering.
right. And underpinning that relationship, the leader should really be showing up with the intent to help the person, become a better version of themselves, become more successful, and remove roadblocks
Yeah.
that maybe they don't even realize are there. Like, I had a person who used to talk over people all the time. And it was
Mm.
just that they were so excited to
Yeah.
contribute to their part of the conversation and didn't want to forget what they had to say. They
Yeah.
didn't realize how that was coming across to other people, right?
Hmm.
And sort of in that miscommunication way, they were
Hmm.
trying really hard to do what they thought was right, and it was creating a different outcome than what they were seeing. So,
Yeah, well, and that's also the role of the manager is to be a mirror in some way, like, to be the friend that says like you got something in your teeth. Like, most people are just too
right,
like too conflict averse for that. But like someone does need to, if you care, if you truly care for them, someone does need to be like, hey, you are known for consistently interrupting people, and that's causing your colleagues not to like you, or whatever it may be. And doing that, telling someone that is actually a much greater service than ignoring it to preserve their short-term feelings.
yes, yeah, that will serve them for their lifetime,
Yeah.
even though it feels icky to do right now.
Yes. Yeah. And that is the challenge, right? And that's where like the leadership part of being a manager comes in because people differentiate between manager and leader. And I don't know if I have great views on all of that, but that's where you have to, as the leader, have to assume some level of discomfort yourself to do that because it would be much easier, of course, just to not say anything.
Right. Let them sit there with lettuce in their teeth.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good analogy. I might have to write something about that.
Well, let's talk about. I talked about doing, a yearly review for 10 employees, but how do
Hmm.
we maintain quality one-on-ones as the team grows? You got 5 people, you do 30 minutes a
Hmm.
week, time starts adding
Hmm.
up, you get 10 people. Are you
Yeah.
spending 10 hours a week, doing one-on-ones? How do we scale it?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you're probably spending more. I think there's like dis-synergies that occur. You don't get more efficient with more people. You get less efficient, I think, in the absence of some tool or construct. I think this is a big problem, like across every industry. I'm not familiar of a tool in any industry that like really helps with this problem. And it's crazy to me because again, I believe that the way to drive the biggest impact on an organization, of course, is to manage your people more effectively, at least if you're in a people-oriented organization. Most services companies and tech companies are. And this is what it happens in the one-on-one. It's very hard because this is a people problem. This is not a technical problem. Obviously, we're trying to meaningfully help with that at Dev Clarity. We have some enterprise customers that have hundreds of developers across many layers of managers, and that's like part of the pitch. How can you create effective management at scale? Um, but outside of like a tool like Dev Clarity, philosophically, it's these core components of, um, I think if I had to summarize it in one word, it's just accountability. There has to be, well, I guess first there has to be an intention of what is a quality one-on-one. Like someone has to tell the managers or whoever, um, this is our expectation. Like you should be meeting with your team directly every week or 2 weeks, and set that intention. But then someone's got to create accountability, and that's where it falls apart, right? Because people's schedules get busy, and then something gets pushed for a project, and then you say, we'll miss this one, but then we'll resume next one. Well, if you're having biweekly meetings, that means you didn't talk to someone for a month. And one of those misses, much less two or three, can really start to compound in a negative way. And so I think having accountability and discipline around the consistency in one-on-ones is the way you maintain the quality. And I think the best way to create accountability and consistency is through some sort of software that helps do that in an automatic way.
Do you think that organizations can get better consistency in one-on-ones when there's multiple managers involved? Everybody's got their own style, everybody's built their
Hmm.
own
Yeah,
relationship, and everybody is 50% responsible for every relationship they're in. But
right.
but how do you ensure one person's not phoning it in?
Yeah, this is also very tough across all industries. And I think some of these challenges are more pronounced in software development, because I think that being a good developer does not necessarily mean you're going to be a good manager. And I think there is a big lack of training. I mean, we've talked to triple digit engineering managers easily in the last 12 months. And I often, if not always, ask, were you trained to become an engineering manager once you got promoted? And I'm not sure I can recall a single one, like literally one single
Wow.
one. Maybe someone, if I'm talking to like a really big, like Fortune 500 company, got put through some like corporate management thing, but not in any way that they were excited about or they felt prepared them. Um, so some level of training and education is step one, but I realize that's a bit abstract. Like, what is that? Like, how do you actually do that? Um, Again, it gets back to tooling, accountability, consistency. Um, I think like you could go as far as like having, standardized templates and things like that, but I think it's really about providing people with a framework. Like so setting some guardrails basically. And everyone doesn't have to do one-on-ones the same. There are some first principles for one-on-ones. We actually wrote a one-pager guide on best practices for one-on-ones, that are good, but management is just as much an art as a science. You have to adapt it to the person. You have to understand yourself. So that everyone can't be the exact same, and you shouldn't necessarily follow a script, but you do need the guardrails and you need accountability on executing within those guardrails. And so like step one, like education slash foundational, understanding of what does it mean to be a good manager or to have a good one-on-one. And step two, some sort of system or software, uh, to actually keep you accountable in that. But I mean, I think like that is the problem, right? Like that's like the big problem. I'm not aware personally of like a single organization that really has that nailed down.
Yeah, there's always something to strive towards.
Yes. Well, I think I do actually think in this day and age, there is more of an opportunity to solve some of these things than before. Because like whenever you're starting a business, you always have to ask yourself, like, why hasn't this been done yet? Either it's been too hard or the world has not deemed it necessary. I think with some of the management type stuff we're working on, that's more on the hard part. Like everyone knows that effective management's important, but they don't know like how to actually, what does that mean? Like how do we actually get there? I think all the advances in just software and automation can help a lot with some of the creating structure and accountability, whatever. But I think AI could actually be a pretty big unlock here because it allows you to incorporate the qualitative component, which is like the key differentiator of like a one-on-one versus just, tracking metrics in Jira, right? Like that's not that hard. It is hard to evaluate 520 one-on-one notes over the course of a year and summarize themes and trends and sentiment, but that's actually what large language models are excellent at.
Excellent point. What do you think is the impact on team performance directly of quality one-on-ones?
Yeah, this is something we've thought about a lot because again, you know, from our business perspective, we're always thinking about ROIs. Like again,
Right.
my background is a mixture of technology and finance, but I was CFO and like I know you have to have ROIs to sell. And so we're thinking, how a question I've wrestled with is how do you measure effective management? Um, and how you measure it also answers that question. Uh, and basically, I think there are two components, and it has to be both. Um, it's output, higher output. At the end of the day, that's what all. No matter how we've asked people to question, and whether it's a team lead up to a CTO, like at the end of the day, it's just like, did you ship what the powers that be expected you to ship? So that's number one is output, but number two is retention. Um, and so like the short answer is we believe what we're doing increases output and improves retention. But as you think about how do you measure effective managers, um, output's obvious, right? That's the bottom line thing that everybody gets judged on ultimately.
Right.
The thing that I think is sometimes missed is is retention. And the reason retention is important is because it provides an inference on the sustainability of the output that you produced. So, like for example, if you got a project due by year end that you really think is actually going to take you 3 more months, not 1.5, you could turn the dial up, to 10 on your team and get it done, right? So, like from an output perspective, you'd be like, what? Like, whoever CEO might be like, wow, I can't believe we actually shipped this before year end. But then, three out of your 10 developers quit because they've been working 80-hour weeks. And that would imply that you're not going to be able to keep up that level of performance. And so like the combination of output and retention is those are the two things we're trying to improve, but those are also the two things you want to measure to understand if you're doing a good job, in my opinion.
So people leave bad managers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and that's also a theme that we have heard um, a lot when I hadn't even thought about it so much before. But yeah, people don't leave companies, they leave managers. Conversely, people stay for managers. Like that point is worth making. And I've been fortunate because I haven't really had any bad direct managers in my life. I've had some really good ones, many of whom I still have a relationship with, and I've seen firsthand the impact that that can have on your life, like not just your career, but your life. And that's why this is important to me. Conversely, having a negative manager or someone who is selfish or doesn't care about you or whatever can really negatively impact your life as well. And so that's where, maybe that's a separate conversation, but this gets into a little bit more of a mission oriented thing where it's like, I do think there's a bigger purpose that we're playing at here.
Yeah, your experiences at work follow you into your life.
Oh
They're
yeah.
not, they're not separable when shut the computer lid. It's not over. If you
Right.
had a bad day, it was a bad day. And
Right.
if you have a bad manager, you have many bad days. and that
Yeah,
that compounds over time. If you have a good manager and you enjoy the people that you work with and find the stuff you're working on interesting, why don't you wake up and do that every day? That feels
right,
great, right?
right. Yeah, and it just yeah, it just makes sense on every level. We were actually talking to one of our customers yesterday, and this particular person is just an excellent manager and just really gets fired up about growing his people. And he was talking about the fact that like this is a rapidly growing uh, startup, about 50 people in the company. He's talking about the fact that like people could make more money going somewhere else if they worked for a big company, but the reason the pitch that he makes, and if they don't want this, they can opt out, of course, of joining the company, is that you'll get more attention here in terms of personal growth, development, and collaboration, and knowledge than you would anywhere else. And it's a very compelling pitch, like you said. It's like, what's another 10% of your salary if you hate your job versus being in an environment with people that you enjoy being with and being with a manager that's actually helping grow your career.
Yeah, and everybody needs to find that balance for themselves.
Right. Yeah, and that is the key point, right? There's no right answer.
Yeah,
But you do have to have self-awareness to know what you're trying to optimize for.
exactly. What's something that's a key takeaway you want us to have about software developer one-on-ones?
Yeah, like I said, if you ask me questions, I'm going to get back to the principles all the time. It's just all about consistency. Like you got to build that process. You got to adhere to it consistently. As with everything, it's kind of like the chop wood, carry water. It's not going to be something that necessarily magically changes things overnight. But if you do it consistently, it will impact your happiness, your developer's happiness, and then ultimately your team's performance to do one-on-ones.
Build the relationships, have the conversations, increase the team performance, and there's tools to help you along the way.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to be.
Right on. Well, Peter, I thank you very much for the conversation today. A lot of good stuff
Yeah.
to take away about one-on-ones. Lots of room for us to educate, learn better how to scale, and provide our employees with a great experience
Yeah, I think so. And appreciate you having me on.
for sure. And on behalf of Peter and myself, we wish you a happy tech life. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.